Yeah. Well, you know what I'll do? Maybe I will.
And I'm not going to say too much more because I'd like Michael to tell it himself. So will you join us, Michael?
Well, I had a 3-hour speech ready, but I was told I only have about 20 minutes, so I'm going to read really, really fast. First of all, I'd like to thank your organization, because if it hadn't been for you, I would not be standing here today. And it all started about 13 months ago, when around 6:30 in the evening, we got a phone call from the Red Cross, and my wife Joan picked it up. And this was around dinner time, so we figured, she figured that somebody was looking for a donation. But luckily for them, they quickly said that they mentioned Belgium, and they mentioned an orphanage. So I was in that after all. Anyway, so I get on the phone, and this person said, "Are you Michael Hartog?" I said, "Yes." "Were you ever in an orphanage in Belgium?" I said, "Yes, I was." "Was your name Max Cohn?" I said, "Yes, it was." Now, while this was going on, my mind went, I couldn't believe this. After so many, many years, that my past would suddenly be brought up again. So we had a talk, and they told me there was a man by the name of Leon Schipper, who had been looking for me for a long time. He had been in the same orphanage as I had been, which is called Wiesenbeek, which is between Brussels and Antwerp. The name didn't ring a bell to me. The Red Cross would not give me his address or telephone number. All they would do is give me his email address, because I guess sensitivity issues were at stake. So they gave me his email address. I sent him an email, and I told him, yes, I was in Wiesenbeek. I understand you're looking for me, and here's my phone number, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And P.S., I don't know who you are. So I thought for sure within 5 minutes I would be getting a phone call. Well, I had to wait a few days. During that time, I was talking to my family about it. We were trying to figure out what could somebody from Wiesenbeek want from me. We only thought of two things. Either he wants money from me, or maybe he wants to leave me some money. So we were just joking around. Anyway, 3 days go by, and it's Yom Kippur, and I had been at my sister-in-law's for the evening, came home, and there's a message on my answering machine. Now, those of you who have not met Leon, Leon has a very raspy voice. And the voice on the answering machine was, "My name is Leon Schipper, and I'm the one who saved your life." So you can imagine how I felt. I mean, how is this possible? So I got a big glass of water, sat down, and I called Leon. And he told me a most fantastic story. Now, you have to remember, I was adopted at the age of 10. And I blanked probably everything out of my mind. I had no idea how, my first 10 years of my life, I had no idea or remembered anything about it. I do know that I remember being in an orphanage, but I had very vague memories about it. So Leon tells me this most fantastic story. In October 30th, 1942, he was in this orphanage called Wiesenbeek. And the Gestapo came, and they were emptying out the orphanage. They were going to bring them to a town called Mechlin, which is where the German had a deportation camp, sort of a mini concentration camp. And from there, people went on trains straight to Auschwitz, not even in camps, right to the gas chamber. While the Wiesenbeek was being vacated, the Gestapo asked the woman who ran the place if there are any non-Jewish personnel working here. And she says, yes, we have 2 women who are not Jewish. They said, pay them and let them go. While she was paying them, she wrote a telephone number down and gave it to one of the women and said, please call them. The woman left, made a phone call, called somebody, it turns out to be in the Jewish underground, who in turn called the Queen of Belgium. And through her intervention, they allowed Wiesenbeek, those 58 children, to be spared, including the staff. So while Leon and his friends were running around this area, they came across a room. Now this is what Leon was telling me. They came across this room, and they saw 6 little children sleeping there. Leon saw no Germans around, and he had his friends. He said, let's pick up all these kids and we'll take them with us. I was one of those kids. They put us on this truck, and we went back to the orphanage in Wiesenbeck. Unbeknownst to me at that time, my father was in a room nearby, and he was sent on the train and then to the gas chamber. I was probably about 2 or 3 hours away from being sent on the train. So that's the story that Leon told me. Well, it took an awful lot for me to absorb that because I mean, this is brand new. I'm a 64-year-old man, never knew about my past, and he told me that he had been looking for me for off and on for all these years. Every time we went back to Belgium or Israel, he asked people if they knew where Max Cohn was, and the answer, nobody ever knew. They thought maybe I was in Israel. And anyway, finally, somebody told that the Red Cross, that your agency here, looks for people to get them together. So he called and filled out some forms, and it took them about 15 months to finally match the name Max Cohn and Michael Hartog's. When I was first adopted, I lived in Montreal for 6 months, and that's where I was adopted. And it turns out, I found out that it was the Canadian Red Cross that put the two names together. So before I continue, first of all, I have to really thank your organization for making this possible, because had you not found me, I would have just gone on with my life the way it's always been. I wouldn't say empty, but I have to say that right now I am really thrilled. I have a new life. I'm finding out things about my past. I have met quite a few people who knew me when I was young, and it's been more than gratifying. So for that, from the bottom of my heart, I really have to thank your organization for making this possible. The other thing Leon told me is about a book that was written by this Marie Albert, who ran this orphanage from 1942 through 1944. And after doing a lot of work, I was able to get a few copies, and if you saw pictures in the newspapers, I supplied the book to the writer. But in the book, for the first time in my life, I saw pictures of me when I was 4 or 5 years old. I'd never had a picture of me before. And the shocking picture that I saw was, I was in one of these pictures wearing a cape and a Jewish star. And that kind of blew me a little bit, because I never thought of myself as being one of these kids. But after this happened, and I really realized, yes, I truly am a Holocaust survivor. And seeing these books and so on has really made a tremendous impact on me. After my visit with Leon, my wife and I go to Europe frequently, and we were going to France, and we decided to spend a day in Belgium. So Leon introduced me to 2 of his friends. One of them was hidden with Leon, because when Leon turned 16, he had to leave the orphanage. He was too tall, and the Germans would take these kids and put them to work until they died. So this couple picked me up at the train station in Brussels, and the first place we went to was Mechelen. Mechelen was the gathering and deportation area that the Germans used to send all the Jews to Auschwitz. We went there. It's now it's a housing complex, but there's a museum in there. So we walk into this museum, and when we're looking around, they have pictures and artifacts. This woman who was giving the tour was explaining to people what went on in this particular spot. So my host said to me, "Would you mind if I tell this tour guide here about you?" I said, "No, go ahead." Well, she told him, who I was, and I had been here as a child, and I was saved. And so the tour ended, and the discourse that we had between the 2 of us was just amazing. But what really struck me is watching the faces of these about 30 young kids. They were probably either high school seniors or college freshmen. And you could hear a pin drop, because I could not believe how fascinated they were that instead of hearing about history here, they met somebody who actually lived in a place that no one should know about. I mean, thousands and thousands of Jews, 25,000 to be exact, were deported from that particular camp. So I started to think about the impact that my story must-have on people. I mean, I didn't think about it personally, but every time I met friends or they read the article in the newspaper, they would have tears in their eyes. I mean, that's how emotional all this was, more to them than to me. And so many of my friends were just more than amazed that here I am, you know, they've known me all these years and they never knew this about me. Well, I didn't know this about me either. And then after we left Mecklen, we went to visit my old orphanage. It's still there. It's a home for delinquent boys today. But they had arranged to have another man meet me in front of the orphanage before I went in, who remembered me. He's about 8 years older than I am. And we went inside. Unfortunately, I personally didn't remember it well, but he was telling me that he had been bar mitzvah there because the woman who ran the orphanage tried to keep the Jewish faith, you know, really strong. But when he met me, and he showed me pictures of myself while I was there, I mean, he had tears in his eyes. I mean, this is the effect that just knowing that there was a survivor from Wiesenbeck that came back to Belgium, it was very, very touching. After that, I mean, it was a very hectic day. They took us to meet a woman in Brussels who was 85 years old, and she is one of the righteous. She is 85 today, and she and her group were responsible for saving over 3,000 Jewish kids in Belgium. She was Catholic. She had been a teacher, and one day she saw that none of the Jewish kids appeared in class. In those days, the Jewish kids had to wear stars, and one day she came to school, and there were no Jewish kids. And she asked the principal of the school, "Where are the kids?" Well, the Germans said they can't go to school anymore, they're going to be sent away, and so on. And she says, "We can't allow this to happen." And here this woman, how she found her way to the underground is still unknown. But she was what's called a transporter. When the Gestapo would send for a family to report to Mecklen or to Brussels to be taken away, very often they would call somebody and say, "Look, take my child from me." I mean, could you imagine parents having to give up a child to a stranger? The stranger cannot tell them where they're taking the kid because they didn't want to find anybody. And this was her job. Her name is André Galin, and she was such an inspiring person to meet, to know her story. They did a documentary film about her, and she's just remarkable. How she was able, with her group, only 12 of them, to save all these kids. And she took her life in her hands because had she been stopped by the Gestapo, and they found out that she was transporting a Jewish kid, they would have put her away. So that was my trip back to Belgium. And then let me see what else I can talk about. I mean, there's so many stories. I've met a number of people who had been in Wiesenbeck with me. It's too long to tell it for this evening, but I have to tell you that somehow it's changed my life. I feel so much more fulfilled. All of us who do get to meet there's a special bond between us. Nothing has to be said. When I met Leon in California, it was a very, very emotional meeting. And we spent 2 days with them at their home. And Leon's wife, Elise, was telling Joan that Leon never talks that much. I mean, when we got together, we just kept talking and talking. And because Leon I'm a quiet person, but Leon is even more quiet. And we just reminisced, and he told me an awful lot of stories because he was 14 at the time. So he remembers. I mean, he did lose his mother and father as well. But having met him, I mean, he is a wonderful person. I think a number of you here have met Leon. So it's just been a wonderful experience. And as I kept having these great experiences, I kept thinking, gee, if the Red Cross had never put us together, none of this would be happening today. I've also met, I'll tell you one other story because time is short. We have a friend who lives in Bethany. She works for the school board in Salisbury, Maryland. And during the week of the Holocaust, where they teach the Holocaust to students, this woman addressed a class, and these kids were, I don't want to say mentally retarded, but they were mentally challenged. And she told them my story. Well, these kids, a few weeks later, these kids were brought to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and they put money together, and they bought a pin, and they came back to school, and they went to see my friend, and they said, we went to the Holocaust Museum, we'd like you to give this pin, which I'm wearing here, which means, it's in Hebrew, which means remember. Please give it to the young man you were talking about. So the impact of my story on total strangers is just incredible. I mean, that amazes me more than when my friends learn about it. And the last thing I want to talk about is what all this has meant to my family. When they were growing up, one of my kids once asked, Dad, what was your upbringing like? And I'd never talked about my past, so Joan kicked me under the table. We were in a restaurant someplace. It's time to talk to them. Well, all I was able to tell the kids, I said, look, guys, I have 4 sons. I grew up in an orphanage, and I lived there until I was 10 years old. I lost my mother and father, and I was an adopted child. And that's all I was able to tell them because that's all I knew. So when this news came out and we were on television and they have copies of the book and we started to put pieces and pieces together, they realized how thankful they are to Leon and to the Red Cross for filling them in on what this is all about. My kids are more than grateful to Leon. We had Leon over at our house, and we had dinner with him, and then we invited a lot of friends who wanted to meet him. And I had to really cut the list down because there were so many people who were so struck by this particular story that we just didn't know how many to invite. But they were all taken by Leon. Leon, we sat at the table and he told the story. So my kids and relatives and friends all asked Leon questions about what made him pick up a child, you know, out of the blue. I mean, here it's a 14-year-old kid just running around, and what makes somebody like that just pick up kids who were sleeping there? And his answer is he sort of, I mean, he's a very bright man, and he sort of knew that being there was not a good thing. So that's why he said anything that he can do against the Germans is great for him. So what you've done for me, and you know, and I guess for Leon, because he's the one who has been searching for such a long time, has been more than remarkable. And for me, life goes on. I have met so many people, and I'm still meeting them. And an awful lot of my friends have come over to me and said, Michael, I didn't know this about you, and so on. I mean, people who we rarely ever talked to or knew came out of the woodwork. They sent me articles that appeared in this newspaper from Miami, from Atlanta, from the West Coast. Even the Chinese paper had the article in Los Angeles. So all I could say is that thanks to your organization, I am more than grateful, and I'm really very humbled to be here tonight, and more than grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was beautiful, profound, and touched all of us, all the people that work so hard here on the board, as well as all the 100 volunteers and the foreign staff. Thank you very much for your kind words. We wish you luck, and we thank you for who you are.